Welcome back to Talk Jamaica here on Talk Jamaica Radio. We are streaming live on www.talkjamaicaradio.com. I am Ralston Chamberlain.
And I'm Ricardo Brooks. Listeners, we're now in the second half of the discussion segment. In June 2014, Jamaica was back on the Tier 2 watch list in the 2014 Trafficking in Persons report released by the U.S. State Department. Jamaica had improved its position last year with a Tier 2 ranking after it passed amendments to the Trafficking in Persons Act. However, the U.S. State Department says Jamaica is back on the watch list because despite implementing amendments to strengthen Jamaica's anti-trafficking law, the government did not demonstrate evidence that it increased efforts to address human trafficking over the previous reporting period. It says an alarmingly high number of children are reported missing in Jamaica, and some of them are likely subject to forced labor or sex trafficking. So the question is, why are our children so vulnerable? Are the authorities efficiently equipped to deal with trafficking in persons? And what role can ordinary citizens play to help us to understand the trafficking in persons situation in Jamaica? To discuss these and other issues, we're joined online by Caseta Green. And I'm sorry, I'm having a very difficult challenge with your name, Miss Green, but I hope I got it right this time. Acting Deputy Registrar of the Office. Okay, great. Acting Deputy Registrar of the Office of the Children's Registry. Welcome. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon to you and your listeners. Thank you so much for having me on your program this evening.
Not a problem. So let me start by asking you, what is human trafficking exactly, and how can someone identify that this is taking place?
Human trafficking, as defined by our domestic law, which is the Trafficking in Persons Act of 2007, is defined as the recruitment, transportation, harbor, or receipt of a person by means of a force, fraud, deception, in order to have that person exploited.
Mm-hmm. So
I'm giving you the most simplest way of understanding it.
Right. So I think when people hear about human trafficking, they literally think of persons turning up on our borders in things like containers and then being forced to work. Is that a part of what happens?
Well, a part of what happens when persons refer to human trafficking is it can happen whether both in the country, so from one community to another, from one parish to another parish, or let's say from Jamaica, someone is taken or tricked into accepting a job opportunity overseas, and when they go, it's very different terms under which they thought they would have gone. So instead of working at their will, their travel documents would have been taken from them. They're placed into situations where they're forced to work and sometimes forced to conduct activities of sexual exploitation and forms of domestic servitude or forms of forced labor. And it can happen across national borders, international borders, or within the country itself.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Ricardo.
What I wanted to know was whether or not there are any telltale signs, yes, as prescribed by the government and the OCR, where normal citizens can look and say, okay, that person might be subjected to involuntary servitude.
Okay. Well, some of the indicators that may be used to identify if a person is a victim of human trafficking is to look and see whether that person is constantly under surveillance by someone. Is that person able to communicate freely with others? In the case of a child, do you notice a child who has suddenly appeared in your community, perhaps living next door to you? You recognize that that child is not allowed to interact with other children or other persons. The child is constantly in the home. The child is not being sent to school, which is, of course, against the law under the Child Care Protection Act of 2004. It may be a case of a child who is being sold to prostitute him or herself, because prostitution can also happen. Sexual favors are also requested of boys and not just girls. So both boys and girls are susceptible to this form of modern-day slavery. But unfortunately, it's more so our girls who are among the more vulnerable group. You may see bruises or other signs of abuse by that person. Maybe the person is not able to manage his or her own money. So in a case where someone is working for an employer, but the conditions are that which the person is forced to work. The employer collects all the money. The person is not being fed. They're not being given access to other rights such as medical care, rest. Maybe they're working excessive hours. Maybe the person might seem very fearful in the presence of others. So those are some of the things that you can look for in identifying whether someone might be at risk of being trafficked. And in our own Jamaican experience, we may know of situations where a child is sent from the home of a parent, maybe a single parent could be, who is maybe unemployed or underemployed, so that it's really tough with the finances. And the person sends the child off to live with someone who is better off, more financially stable, in the hope that the child is going to be sent to school, the child will have access to greater amenities, and so on. But instead of the child being sent to school and given this greater access to other basic rights, the child is kept at home and they have to do all the washing, the cooking, the cleaning, the ironing. Maybe the child might be forced to perform sexual activities. And so there is a benefit then to the trafficker. And it may either be through sexual gratification or monetary. So we do have the cases where persons are trafficked either for sex, forced labor, they're engaged in the drug trade or activities, and even in some parts of the world, persons are trafficked and their organs are removed from their bodies and sold.
Okay.
But let me ask you, Miss Green, because I hear you talk persons not recognizing these things, but according to the report, some of the trafficking and adults as well take place in nightclubs, in bars, sometimes in some of our resort areas. Is it that citizens in these places sees this as a regular thing? It's a normal part of our culture, and hence they are reluctant to act or to report?
Well, one of the things I must hasten to say, though, is that in the U.S. State Department's report of the government of Jamaica's response to dealing with human trafficking, there are some unsubstantiated claims that we would like definitely for the public to understand. So as it relates to even cases where there is a link between sex tourism, that is something that is not contained within the Jamaican law. And so there could not have been cases of reports or prosecutions for activities that are not akin with criminal offenses that are seen under the Jamaican law. And then even as we look at other matters where it might have been stated that there are children who, there's a link between children who are seen begging on the streets or vending, that again is not considered to be trafficking based on how the law defines trafficking. But because begging would be a discrete offense under the Child Care Protection Act, which is already provided for. So we wouldn't want to, I don't want us to confuse what may have been speculated against what is actual. The same also goes for cases of missing children. Sometimes persons are very quick to link that because this child went missing, it means that this child was trafficked. And that is also another myth that we would like persons to understand, that it's not always so, but what happens is that when a person is reported or a child is reported as missing, the Jamaica Constabulary Force, they have different arms, and so the Trafficking in Persons Unit, where the information that is available denotes that the child may be a victim of trafficking, then we have all the different arms activated. So you have the PICA, which is the Passport Immigration and Citizenship Agency. They would be activating the stop orders at the ports of entries. The police will be doing their investigations. But in some cases, we have seen that a child would have been reported missing today and the child is returned home by tomorrow. And in some of those cases, the child was perhaps taken by another parent without the primary caregiver knowing, or maybe the child went to sleep at someone else's home. So there are different reasons where children go missing. All of them are not necessarily known to us because we would like to be able to have the empirical evidence coming from the investigation report so that we can better give that information to the public. But we wouldn't want us to mix the two cases, children who are trafficked with what's happening with what is seen or defined as sex tourism, and that clearly has not yet been defined or even accepted under our Jamaican law. But what I can say, though, and I'm very happy to say, is that Jamaica has been taking substantial efforts to educate the public on what it is that human trafficking is. And I'm not sure if you would have seen them for yourself, but there have been billboards that have been erected. 7 anti-trafficking billboards have been placed at strategic locations across the country. There's one in Portmore, Barbican Road, Washington Boulevard, Red Hills Road, in Montego Bay, on Humber Avenue. There's also one in Ocho Rios and one in Negril. There have been bus ads that have been placed on the JUTC buses, 13 of them, letting persons know that human trafficking is a modern-day slavery and how it is that they perceive that they might have seen a victim, that they can make a report either to the Office of the Children's Registry for Children or to the Trafficking in Persons Unit. So there has been some work, and it's the first time that Jamaica has actually taken such aggressive steps in trying to awaken the awareness, not just of adults, but even with children through school tours and other means.
Ms. Green, I want to bring your attention back to that issue of the culture and sometimes what we confuse to be trafficking. A lot of Jamaicans, oftentimes when they hear that a child has gone missing, there's this idea that, throw a run to run off with our man, and so there's almost an insensitivity to the missing child because there's this assumption that perhaps are only bad picnic runway. Now, how do you respond to that almost cultural mindset that is only bad picnic runway?
Well, one of the things that the Office of the Children's Registry has been doing since it acquired responsibility for the management of the Ananda Alert system in March 2013 is to, one, let persons know that once the caregiver or parent is unable to identify where the child is, that report must be made immediately, either to the police or to the Office of the Children's Registry. We cannot assume that the child is at a particular location. And we have seen in our recent news reports the unfortunate cases with the young man in the 9-year-old in St. James, whose grandmother said that she thought that he was staying at someone else's home. Now, those are matters of improper supervision that we've been trying to stress to parents. It is your responsibility under the Child Care Protection Act to ensure that your child is properly supervised by a fit and responsible adult. And this also brings to mind that case with the 3 children who were burnt in the home in Westmoreland. And I'm just making the reference about the importance of proper supervision of children.
Absolutely.
It is not within our remit or to assume that a child ran away. And if a child ran away, we must find out why did that child run from the home. What is it that's pulling the child from the home and what's pushing the child from the home? Because there are push and pull factors. There are cases where children may be subjected to abuse in the home or maybe within their community or in their school, and one of the avenues for their escape is to run away, thinking that would be able to protect themselves better that way. There are children who would want to have greater freedom. So I have a friend whose mother is a little bit more liberal. She will allow me to go to some fest or to stay out late at night. I prefer not to stay in my home because maybe my parents' rules and regulations are too stringent, We have children who are abducted and kidnapped, and they're sexually exploited or they're physically abused and neglected. And so we have to treat this matter of missing children as very important, but we also must underscore the need for parents and children to understand how it is that they can protect themselves. And so one of the things that the OCR has been doing too is meeting with parents at PTA meetings. We go to schools, we do school tours, so we tell the children, it is your responsibility not to give personal information to persons who might be talking to you on the telephone or on the internet through Facebook and other means. It is important that you know that if you're going to be walking home from school or taking the public transportation, to travel in groups, because there's always safety in numbers. We say to them that you must report unwanted or sexual advances or other forms of abuse, or you must be able to identify when someone has invaded your personal space. When they have done so, you must make a report or you must make an alarm so that other persons can come and assist you. And then we say to the parents, you must teach your children how to protect themselves. Let them understand that if someone approaches them and offers them the world and what wonderful gifts, such as the tablets, you know, the children, especially the teenagers, everybody wants to have a Samsung tablet, or they want to have one of those hype phones, as the young people would call them.
Right.
They have to understand that you don't accept gifts or rights from people who you don't know, and not just the people you don't know too. But look at cases where children are even taken and abused by persons they know. These are trusted adults, whether it's a family friend or a relative. So you say to them, if I am not the one who is coming to pick you up at school, or you must say to them, I am the only person that's supposed to pick you up at school, or auntie so-and-so. If the school must know that if it's not me or auntie so-and-so that comes to pick up the child is not to be given into the care of anyone else. So the issue of missing children and how it is that we perceive the care and protection of our children, it has to be changed. We have to first see it as parents as our first responsibility. And when we're teaching our children how to protect themselves, let us do some role play. You have to have the safe codes and you have to have the safe words so that children do experiment with them. I'll share something with you. A parent told us that one of the things she did to try and protect her child from being kidnapped or abducted by anyone was to do an experiment. The child was at school, and at the end of the school session, she sent an adult to go in and have engage the child in a conversation. Now, this person is unknown to the child, right? Yes. And the person was trying to get the child to come and say, Mommy sent me for you. We'll stop and get some Burger King on the way. You know, everything is fine. And she noticed that the child was going off with the person. Did she teach the child to not go with strangers? Of course. But then it taught her that maybe she needed to look back at how she was teaching that child. Maybe she needs to go back to the message and how the message was being delivered. And so she went back and had a discussion with her child. And then a few months later, she did another experiment with another individual, and the child created an alarm and ran away seeking help. So we're trying to explain to parents that you have to be practical. And then you have the caregivers now. Am I one of those persons who is going about my business day to day, and I notice that there is a child on the street, and I fail to make a report to the Office of the Children's Registry, because when street children are taken, who will miss them?
Yes.
Those are some of the questions that we ask persons to consider. And we don't want it to just be that when something goes bad, that's when we will all start creating an alarm and stating that the government needs to do more. But first, the responsibility comes within the home, the community.
All right. I want to come back to something you spoke about, Ms. Green, in the report, and you said that there are certain speculations in the report that is unsubstantiated. And Carl Palmer, the permanent secretary in the Ministry of Justice, also disagrees with findings in the report. Has any move been made to correct any of these unsubstantiated report, or to write to the U.S. Department regarding this? Are you aware of any?
Well, I am aware that the government of Jamaica has prepared a response to the U.S. State Department, and has had some initial dialogue with representatives, but in terms of the intricacies of those discussions, I'm not at liberty to share or are aware of it. But it has not gone unnoticed, but the government of Jamaica, especially because it's important that where there are misconceptions about what GOJ has been doing to combat human trafficking, it must be clearly addressed, and it must be rectified wherever there are misconceptions. So there has been a response to the U.S. report made by the government of Jamaica.
All right.
And it has done so by clearing up some of the issues where it was made mention that missing children are also, there's a linkage between the missing children and trafficking in children, the lack of public awareness campaigns that have been engaged by the government of Jamaica, as well as the assistance to victims who would have been fallen victims of human trafficking, because there is, in fact, a tip shelter that is fully operational, and it currently gives assistance to a victim. So in the report, it had said that there was none. So there are different levels of engagement, of dialogue that has been done by the government of Jamaica since that report has been released by the U.S. Department.
Okay. Finally, Ms. Green, I'd just like you to tell citizens who are listening generally how they can assist in reducing trafficking in persons.
Well, as we had mentioned, some of the indicators earlier, some of the things to look for, is just for citizens to become more vigilant, looking at whether they see persons who seem to be under someone else's control. As it relates to children, they need to look out to see whether these children are missing from school or missing from the home. Once they have made that kind of, once they have identified these signs of possible cases of child trafficking, then it is then upon them to make the report to the Office of the Children's Registry for Children, which is to our toll-free number 1-888-PROTECT. That's 1-888-776-8328. And our offices are open Mondays to Fridays between 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. We would also want to urge parents or caregivers to do what they must to protect their children and to safeguard their care and protection. And then for the adults, for them to also not be tricked and easily lured by those promises of better jobs and better opportunities, because if it seems too good to be true, it probably is.
All right, Ms. Green.
And
we
just
want
quickly, as we...
Go ahead.
Right, just very quickly, as it relates to the matter of missing children, I just wanted our parents to understand the importance of having a recent photograph of the missing child, so that when the alerts are sent out, they can be sent out with that kind of information, as well as the information about where the child was last seen, the clothes the child was last seen wearing, and so forth.
Okay. All right, thank you very much, Ms. Green. We want to thank Acting Deputy Registrar in the Office of the Children's Registry, Caseta Green, for having joined us here on Talk Jamaica to really bring us up to speed on this whole issue of human trafficking